Hi, thank you very much for joining us. Hello, I'm Laura Courtney. I'm a Policy and External Affairs Manager here at CHC, and I'll be your facilitator for this webinar. You'll just see me at the beginning and then again at the end for the question stage. And I'm the Policy Lead here at CHC for Governance. At CHC, we obviously want to support members as they manage the impact of coronavirus COVID-19, and working with board members is obviously such a critical thing in terms of this. So this is an opportunity to hear from Fiona Pethick of Central Consultancy about supporting boards during the COVID-19 crisis. This webinar will be recorded and circulated to the sector after we've finished. If you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, then please type it in the box that you'll see on the control panel on the right of your machine. I'll, as I say, come back in when Fiona's finished talking, and I'll read through those questions on your behalf. But as you go along, you can just ask those questions and we'll be having a look at them. If we don't manage to get to everything, then we will speak to Fiona and make sure she's able to have a look at those questions and answer them, and then we will circulate that Q&A with the recording of the webinar at the end. So that's really all from me. I'm just going to say thank you so much to Fiona and hand over to her. Fiona.
Thank you. So thank you everybody for joining today's webinar about supporting your board during the COVID-19 crisis. I hope that you and your families are all safe and well at this very anxious time, and that you're going to find today very helpful. Just by way of introduction, I've been working with Central Consultancy for the last 3.5 years, and I've spent most of that time working with RSLs in North and South Wales on good governance matters. And before that, I did a variety of roles, mainly relating to governance. But what's most relevant to today is that I've sat in most of the seats around the board table, except the CEO seat, although I've had several senior director roles. And I think it gives me the ability to relate to how people feel sitting in each of the roles around the board table. I always think I come to governance thinking about how people feel sitting in each of the seats around the board table. And when we come to thinking about how we have to have board meetings in a virtual world, I think it's quite important to think about what it must feel like if you are one of the board members coming to a virtual board meeting for the first time. So I expect the session, what I'm going to say, to take about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to have time for you to ask some questions at the end. So the purpose, I'm really aiming this session at company secretaries and governance teams. And I want it to be able to help those company secretaries and governance teams to help your boards to continue to make effective decisions in these difficult times. But whatever your role is in relation to your board, I'm hoping you're going to find the session helpful. I'm hoping not necessarily to give you answers, but to help you to think of the questions you need to be asking yourselves, just to think about what it is, just to give you some prompts about what you need to be thinking about. Every board's different and the context matters. So as I say, these are going to be things to think about rather than necessarily all the answers. So I'm going to think about the practical matters. Actually, getting those right is really important. I'm going to think about some of the governance matters. I'm going to think about good practice issues. I'm going to think what's the difference about risk and assurance in these difficult times. I'm going to talk about a quick check against the right stuff, you know, the regulatory board's advice about the right people at the right times, in the right things, doing the right things in the right order. And then, as I said, we'll come back to some questions. So, practicalities. I'm going to spend a little while on the practicalities because I think, well, I always think it actually matters getting these right. Getting some investment in those is well worth it. As company secretaries, you probably always spend a bit of time on the practicalities. There are a lot of practicalities in getting any board meeting right. and the practicalities involved in a normal board meeting don't go away just because you're doing the meeting virtually. In fact, I think they probably just get a little bit more difficult. I want you to think, I think you need to think about the roles around the board table. And I think if you're one of those company secretaries who's used to multitasking, who's thinking about doing 3 things at once, and many company secretaries do, you probably need to think about whether you can do that when you're doing things virtually. It's not quite as easy to have that sort of the nod and the wink, the exchange with your colleague who's taking the minutes, and agree who's going to do what. You can't. You're probably just going to have one task each. So who's the minute taker? Who's actually going to be the one who's got who's doing the more company secretary role? Are you actually going to separate those 2 things out a little bit? What about the chair? Is the chair clear that they've got all they need? Are they going to be chairing the meeting? Are they clear how they're going to know who wants to speak and when they're going to and how they're going to know who wants to speak in a virtual environment? I think there are actually some need for some clear signals and potentially some patterns of working. I think it just needs a little bit more thinking than usual. The platform, which platform are you going to use? It's quite, I'm not going to suggest one or the other, one platform or another. I've been using Zoom a lot, it's quite easy. But your executive will have decided which platform it's using for your organisation. And the best thing is probably just to go with that. But your non-execs may not be as familiar with it as your executive. Your chair may not be as familiar with it. You might need some practice sessions. I suggest that you, as company secretary, instigate some practice sessions. You might want a practice session with your chair, your CEO, and yourself, just to run through how you would actually run a board meeting on the platform. How is it actually going to pan out? Who's going to make what happen and when? How will that actually work in real life? What are the things you're going to actually need to think about, and just make sure everybody's thought that all through. Your board members, some of them may have practiced using some tools, some of them may have practiced using other tools, some of them may not have practiced or used any tool at all. It might make sense for you as company secretary to actually call up each board member and run through how they're actually going to do it on a one-by-one basis. Have they actually thought about how are they actually going to use the screen, which piece of equipment they're going to use? Are they actually going to be able to use their laptops for a meeting? Where are they actually going to see their papers if they've got their laptop on this for the virtual meeting? Are they going to need multiple devices? Have they thought this through? Have they had a practice? They might be more prepared on a one-to-one basis to say this is difficult. However, you might actually, before you get that far with your board member, probably need a conversation. How are they? That's what I would call a sort of duty of care conversation. The sort of conversation that either the company secretary or the chair probably ought to be having with each board member. In these difficult times, how are they? None of us are really all of us are affected in some way by this horrible virus. And I think you probably want to take the time with each board member to make sure they know it's all right to say, hang on, I'm not up for this meeting. I'm not ready. I'm not in a fit state. I'm not fit to participate in this meeting. Or actually, I was all right when I talked to you last week and we did all the preparation, but this week something else has happened and I'm not going to be able to take part. I think, as company secretaries, we should be in that position of being able to have those conversations with our board members, and so that we can anticipate some fluidity in attendance and be ready to accept some conversations like that with our board members. So, as I say, we should be preparing, we should be checking in with individuals, we should be practicing with the technology, we should be setting protocols for how people will indicate whether and when they want to speak. Some boards decide you need to put your hand up. Is that the right way for your board? Some of the technologies have mechanisms with a buzzer that indicates that you put your hand up. Is that how it works in your organisation? You need to work that out for yourselves, but preparation is key. I think long meetings on the platform are tricky. I think you need to keep agendas short and papers focused. I think if a meeting is going to go on for more than 90 minutes, you should plan a break. I think 60 to 90 minutes is long enough without a break. So, put breaks in, allow people to go and stretch their legs. Accept that people's concentration looking at a screen is not as long as it would be in a real meeting. And I might encourage board members to send their comments to the chair in advance. Make sure this is good practice in any situation, but if there's a risk that some people might not be there on the day, they might not be there in the day because of their own circumstances, they might not be there in the day because the technology might fail in some way. If they've sent their comments through to the chair in advance, then their views will be there as part of the meeting anyway. So those are some of the practicalities I would encourage you to think about in advance. However well you've prepared in advance, be prepared on the day. Be prepared to know who you're expecting to be there. Make sure you've got everybody's phone number and make sure they've got your number. And probably make sure you've got somebody technical in the room who's neither the minute taker nor having any other particular role, who will be ready to answer calls from board members who've not succeeded in getting into the meeting, who can ring up the people you were expecting who are not there, and who can take calls from members who are struggling. I'm a school governor, and the other day I dialed into the meeting, was pretty confident I was in the right place at the right time, and I was with two other governors. We seemed to be sitting waiting for the rest of them to turn up. It did seem a bit odd that we were on our own, and eventually I fiddled around and discovered the whole of the rest of the meeting was happening somewhere else, and it was in full flow when I managed to jump from one place to the other. But nobody seemed to have really missed us. So actually, it was quite possible. It would have been really helpful if the secretary to that meeting had known who she was expecting and that she'd lost 3 of us. So really, take a little bit of time at the start of the meeting. Encourage people to be ready 10 minutes early. If you're having a real meeting, people come early and get their coffee. Well, come along 10 minutes early, bring your coffee with you, have a bit of informal chat, and then start the meeting. It's better to have everybody all together than to start on time. And if you do have late arrivals, I suggest you stop, you pause, and you make sure that they know where you are on the agenda. The school governors meeting I talked about, I did struggle to catch up, because what you can't do in a virtual meeting is turn to your neighbour and say, and whisper in their ear, just tell me where on the agenda we are. You've got no, it's quite difficult to sort of catch the mood of the meeting, or to do any informal catching up. So actually think about what it feels like to be one of those board members, perhaps to be the board member who joined late, who got caught out or whatever. Just think about it from their perspective. Think about the agenda, put your COVID-19 matters first. It doesn't matter, whatever else is on anybody's mind, that's what's going to be uppermost on their minds. That's what else, whatever else might be on the agenda, you might have thought of, planned for your April, your May meeting. It's COVID-19. Keep your papers short. The executive won't want to be writing long meetings. Keep your papers short. If you've got matters for noting, check whether they're needed at all. Can they just go round by email? Remember, your rules and standing orders still apply. The quorum matters. Your quorum is really important, and it's possible that during the meeting the numbers actually present might change if for any reason people dip out, so be very wary of that. Are you sure you know what happens if your chair is unavailable at short notice? Is a vice chair ready? Do you know how to appoint a chair in the meeting if necessary? Are you clear what matters are reserved for decision by the board? And do you know whether how you make decisions between meetings and how those are recorded? Just things to check and to be sure you're ready for at a board meeting. Turning to good practice. Now, these things apply in any meeting, but it is absolutely essential that you record the decision to hold the meeting in a virtual manner. Now, it's probably not in your standing orders, but if you're having a virtual meeting, I suggest you make sure you record that in the minutes, and that you record, as ever, as always, the decisions taken in the meeting and the key points made in decisions. Just because your meeting is virtual doesn't mean you don't keep a record of the papers and the presentations, and you must keep a record of attendance and absence. And if possible, if the attendance sort of flickers during the meeting, not off and on, but if you've got people there for a bit of the meeting and not for others, do try and maintain a record of that too. A lot of boards pause at the end and review their effectiveness. I suggest that's quite difficult to do in a virtual meeting, and at the end of a virtual meeting, people will be tired. I'd suggest you try that by a sequence of emails afterwards. And it's quite likely that your standing orders probably don't really reflect the need to hold virtual meetings, and that perhaps after you've had a couple of virtual meetings, you look and see whether your standing orders could do with a refresh and a section on holding good virtual meetings. Assurance and risk. I don't think these are things you should not lose sight of, but I think there are things you probably don't need to do in the short run. I think routine reporting on the strategic plan and committee agendas, the things that were, well, we always talk about this in May, lots of things can probably be put to one side. It's probably not the time to be recruiting new board members. Think about what works for you. These are things to think about, not decisions on my part, but things for you to think about. I suggest you should be keeping matters around reporting compliance activity, regulatory compliance, and probably keeping appraisals and reviews of how effective the board is. But what should you be starting in this particular peculiar time we're in? You might, as a board, be wanting to meet more frequently and for shorter meetings. That might prove more effective. You might be receiving more reports on immediate actions and more operational matters. The executive might find that comforting to have the board's backup for those. There may be a need to increase delegations to the exec to increase flexibility. And there may be a need to set some KPIs to measure business continuity. And you may particularly need to look at financial stress testing for scenarios emerging from COVID-19. So there's a need to just think about what assurance and risk it should be thought about in these particular circumstances. And none of this is easy, but I think it's helpful to look back to the right stuff as a guideline. I'm a fan of the regulatory board's right stuff guidance. I think it's a really clear guide up to boards as a way of just checking for yourselves whether or not you feel at any particular point in time, do you think your board has got for the right people round the table doing the right things in the right way for the right reasons at the right time? So you might not have a full board, but have you got the right mix of people? Have you got the right enough of the board? Are they the right skills mix? Are you missing particular skills? Are you missing particular people that are going to make things difficult? Is there anything you can do about that? Do you think the things that are actually coming to the board at the moment are the things they should really be looking at? Are there things that you should be looking at that are not coming to the board? Vice versa, are the things that are there really the things that matter? Are they being done in the right way and in the right reasons? Are there different ways you could be approaching the issue in the light of a crisis? Are there simpler ways of doing things? Are you still abiding by the core values of the organisation? And are they being done at the right time? I think if you can just use this as a sort of guideline check, I think you'll find that quite a helpful way of checking what's going in front of your board. So much of what I've said is appropriate at any time. It's not particularly COVID-19 related, but I hope it's just a refresh of some governance principles, but put in the context of our difficult and crisis times. And I'm open to answer some questions if that would be helpful.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That was incredibly useful and an incredibly kind of effective way to go from kind of start to finish to start to think through all the various aspects we'll need to think about. We haven't had any questions typed in at the moment, so I'll kick us off. And obviously, if people do have questions they'd like to put to Fiona, then just type that in, as I say, to that question category on the control panel on your screen. I wondered what your advice might be about supporting chairs in particular to make sure that they feel kind of confident and happy about chairing virtual meetings. Anything kind of specific that you would advise in terms of that? And I'll just give you a couple up front. And then anything you feel like you mentioned, kind of duty of care and keeping in touch with board members, and also kind of effectiveness of board meeting checks. Is there anything in particular or any way in particular you think that engagement between board meetings with board members should be managed? Back over to you.
I think chairs, company secretaries and governance teams will know their chairs reasonably well, but some chairs will be more au fait with the technology. Some will be more used to just coming in and chatting through agendas with the exec, and sometimes they will with the chief exec, and sometimes the company secretary will be used to being in that conversation with them. I think in this circumstance, the company secretary might push their way a little bit more gently into that conversation than usual, and ideally try and have a three-way conversation between themselves, the chair, and the CEO. And if that's not going to be possible because the chief exec is running around doing COVID-19 things, and I can imagine that might be the case, perhaps try and have at least a first conversation just with the chair, to have to make sure that as company secretary governance person, that they know the chair is confident with the technology. Some chairs will be in multiple organisations and using multiple sets of technology. And I know I'm in that sort of circumstance where, you know, the school I'm a school governor of wants me to use this, and the consultancy I'm working for wants me to use that, and the other organisation wants me to use another thing, and that's fine, but I do need to know how they all work. And you know, when I wanted to come and use this webinar setup, I wanted a practice, and I think that's quite reasonable. And if you know, and to want to actually say, well, okay, and how do you want this to work? But actually, sometimes it helps if somebody says to me, well, actually, I want you to practice this, and to do that, and to push you a little bit to do that. So I think it falls actually. I'm a fan of company secretaries and governance teams being just that little bit more pushy sometimes, and saying, for this meeting to work, we need you, Mr. the Chair, to make this happen. I would encourage you to do that. And the chair of them, and you asked me as well about this sort of what I call the duty of care. The chair may have may be in that position, may have their own issues, and may or may not want to talk about them. But actually, you need to understand, what is it, when is it the best time to call? How can you best fit around the multiple roles a chair might have, and how can you help them work through the issues, and what is it that would make life easier for them? So you're there as a governance team, as a company secretary, to be supportive and to help them work with it, and they may themselves then be able to help the other board members.
And in terms of any kind of specific questions to ask board members, maybe between meetings, to do that kind of effectiveness check in terms of the meetings, and then anything specific you think you should be asking them. I'm thinking kind of specifically about whether they feel kind of able to feed in on sensitive issues, or those kind of things effectively in that virtual environment.
I think it's just a case of as a company secretary, you probably know those people reasonably well, and you're probably reasonably confident as to which of them are technically capable, are more technically capable than others. Some board members are, technically, have had no trouble adapting to using board papers online, and some of them will have preferred other means. And it's actually, if they're used to having their board papers on the iPad that's provided by your organisation, are you going to be zooming to them on another machine, or are you going to be zooming on that iPad? In which case, where are they getting their papers from? Are you actually then going to need to put them something in the post? And it's actually having some of those conversations with them is one of the things you might need to do. But just the odd phone call, and and just keeping on top of things, and actually how frequent, what is the schedule of meetings you're planning out? How far in advance are you planning planning meetings? You've probably got, what is this you've probably got meetings planned for the rest of the year, but what is the how far out are you revising that schedule, and what can you actually tell people about any changes?
Absolutely.
Is there reason to give some, and there's potentially in that some reason to just maintain some contact.
Absolutely. So we haven't had any questions, but we do have a comment that it's useful to remind ourselves for the need for patience. Things take longer this way, in meetings and outside of meetings. So yeah, just kind of finding ways, I guess, to kind of maintain that patience and have people understand that as well. Just checking if anyone else has any more questions. One last one for me, I think, was just in times of crisis, it's tempting to just focus on the crisis. Any recommendations of how to try and make sure you get that balance of people wanting to talk about the crisis issues within agendas, but then also making sure that the ongoing issues have their kind of appropriate time as well?
I think it's a question really about how long are we going to be in this crisis mode for, and I guess partly it depends whether you've had a first, are you having a crisis board meeting and then trying to do your regular board meeting? And I'd be inclined to perhaps have two board meetings, split an agenda into two, and have perhaps two shorter meetings rather than a full meeting. I would be wary of heading into a full meeting, a very long 3 or 4 hour meeting in a virtual way. But I know people do, and just carry on as if nothing had happened. And you wonder whether that's whether the quality of the decision making is as good as it could be, and on whether. So I think it's quite good to stop and think, do we need to make this decision now? Would this decision be any different if we waited 6 weeks, and we would be able to make it potentially post lockdown with additional information? That's a matter for each organisation to think about separately. But those are the sorts of, it's about thinking about what are the risks of making an early decision or a later decision, and that's quite tricky.
Definitely, that's really, really useful. Thank you so much, and I'll thank you, Fiona, on behalf of everyone who's attended the webinar, and thank you all of you for coming along as well. If you do have any questions following the session, please do make contact with us. I know, Fiona, you've put your email address on there as well, and you're happy for any direct contacts. There's just a few things that I've been asked to point out before I let you go from CHC. So we're going to be starting virtual strategic delivery groups. So that starts from next week, and the chairs and chief executives SDG will be held around the end of the week of the 20th of April. So please do look out for the information on that coming through. We're also planning to run a virtual board member networking event, and that's we hope to be during the week of the 27th of April. So again, we'll send details, and please do share that with your board members. And then finally, we sent out a message last week about an offer from our commercial members, ARC. They've got a board meetings software package called Decision Time, and they are offering free, no obligation access to that until September. And so if you haven't done so already and would be interested in using that, then please do get in touch with us. And that's all from us. Thank you so much again for coming along, and thank you to Fiona. Thanks so much. We'll end the session now.